Loggerheads is a fiction book about a murder on a South Carolina barrier island, which brings together a local detective and a sea turtle biologist to unravel a mystery which might impact the race for the White House. Today, I talk one-on-one with the author of this book, Kristen Ness, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
Kristen Ness, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Needless to say, you actually practice immigration law, but now you are a published author with your first novel, At Loggerheads, which is a fiction book about a murder on the South Carolina barrier island, which brings together a sea turtle biologist and a local detective to unravel a mystery that might impact the race for the White House. Let me ask you this, Kristen. Why At Loggerheads? Why now?
Well, first of all, the title At Loggerheads is an idiom that means at odds or in conflict. And when I first got this idea for the novel, I was hoping to carry a couple of themes through to the end and tell the story about sea turtles, as well as a murder and a love story to hopefully entertain the reader, but also teach them a little bit about sea turtles while they're reading. So At Loggerheads in particular refers to not only the conflict between environment and development, but also a conflict between the appearance of what's happening in the book and the truth of what's happening in the book. And I guess why now? I've been working on the story for a long time. It took me about 10 years to write the first draft off and on, and then another 5 or so to get it published. So really, I was contemplating these themes over time and wasn't targeting any one particular time frame, but it seems to be a good time to have that discussion, considering a lot of people are moving into the Charleston area. My barrier island is loosely based on the barrier islands here, and we do see that conflict often come up, or the discussion come up about development and environment and how to sustainably develop and how to conserve.
So how do you conserve and obviously sustain while having the conflict and the truth about development and, all the issues?
Well, I think that what I'm hoping is the more that people are aware of what the conflicts might be. So learning about the sea turtles might help people understand what their habitat is used for, why that beach habitat is so important, and how the mother sea turtles come ashore to nest, and how the hatchlings come out of the nest to go to the ocean, and why, in particular, light pollution is such an important thing to pay attention to. So I'm hoping that as people read about the sea turtles, they'll learn to care. And if they care, then they'll hopefully consider sea turtles in nature and the environment in general when they're making decisions about development or about purchasing a beachfront property or about just visiting a beachfront property and knowing what to do. So, for example, the mother loggerhead, when she comes ashore to nest, needs a lot of darkness and quiet, and a crowded beach can cause her to turn around and go back to the ocean and not nest that night, or too much light can do the same thing. When the sea turtle hatchlings are ready to come out, they use the moonlight's reflection on the ocean to find their way to the ocean. And if there's too much light inland, then it can confuse them and going inland and dying. So as people are made aware of that, I think, or I hope, that they'll make decisions that better conserve the environment, in particular the sea turtles, and help them to flourish.
Yes, ma'am. And Ms. Christian, let me ask you this. From a At Loggerheads perspective, where exactly is the light pollution on that barrier island in this particular book?
I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, the light pollution.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So on most barrier islands, you have different levels of development, but the houses that are closest to the beach with their lights facing the beach, those are the lights that most pollute the beach with light. So you want to make sure you've seen the signs that say lights out for turtles. That's a campaign that's been very effective. And what that means is during the summer hours, in particular here, when the nesting season is happening, which on our islands, that's from May through about mid-August. And then the hatchlings come out anywhere from late June all the way through October. So during that time frame from May through October, It's very important for anyone living or staying on those beachfront properties to turn off any outside lights that might be shining onto the beach. And that's what I mean by light pollution.
And going back, obviously, to what you mentioned earlier, development, what new development will have an impact on sea turtles in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think in particular, any development that takes place on the barrier islands where turtles have been historically nesting, which here is pretty much every beachfront along the entire coast. So just being very mindful of overdeveloping, of any kind of development that might impact or destroy the dune system on the beach, which the turtles rely on for making their nest, for their nesting locations. In my book, you'll see that my fictional barrier island has a maritime forest on one end, and that maritime forest plays a large role in protecting the nesting habitats for the sea turtles. So any barrier island or beach system that currently has a maritime forest or some kind of buffer between the beach and whatever the first level of development is so far, we would need to be very careful about any discussion around developing that unspoiled land, because for right now, a lot of that is sea turtle habitat and is important to their nesting.
And I hate to be redundant with this particular question, Christian, but what sustainable development can happen now to protect those sea turtles?
As far as walking back whatever's been done, or are you talking about considering future development, how to sustainably develop?
Yeah, we can talk about considering future development. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would recommend, I think in future development, we already have environmental impact statements that are done whenever a new property is being developed, especially when it's impacting wetlands or is close to a beach. But I think making sure that there's some type of nature or divide between the beach itself and the first level of property being built. So a setback line, which in South Carolina we already have, but just making sure that we don't build any structure right on the dune system. And also when we're building something like a condominium complex or a high-rise hotel, which happens on some of our beaches along this coast, making any visitors aware of the rules for turning off their lights, also taking into consideration what's already existing around that property, leaving trees in place if possible, especially if there is any kind of dune system or maritime forest already existing, to try to preserve that instead of, in some cases I know where developments are done, maybe in other states, they just take out all of the existing flora and then come in and build on top of it. And that can be very disruptive to whatever the ecosystem is at the time.
What is the state of our ecosystem as you know it?
Here in Charleston?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd say that we've maybe been in balance to some extent on our islands as far as not overdeveloping, especially our islands around Charleston. There are very few high-rise hotels built on those barrier islands, which is a good thing. I feel like the people developing in those locations are kept in check by the local politicians and also by lawyers who protect the environment. There's a great group called South Carolina Lawyers for the Environmental Protection. I think that's what it stands for, SCELP. And they do a very good job of making sure that they enforce the environmental laws around this area in particular and the state of South Carolina for preserving our beachfronts. So my understanding is it's always an ongoing battle. I don't think that development is necessarily going to take into consideration the environment at a larger scale than they have been, unless those developers come in with a plan to be sustainable from the start. So it's very hard to change people's minds when money's at stake and they're making an investment and they're hoping to get a return on that investment. But I think it'd be nice and idealistic to think that you could get people to care about what's going on with our environment enough to be bringing that into the conversation when a development is being planned.
What else should be in that conversation right now?
Well, I think in particular, making sure that when a project is at its very infancy and it's being first considered for development, especially if it might impact existing species in that area or some pre-existing forest system, that's given more weight perhaps than it has been in the past, and that becomes a larger piece of the discussion for the long term, and maybe looking out a little bit farther to what impact this might have on the long term of that beach system, and not just the immediate financial return.
And what other fears do you have about our beach system right now going forth?
Well, I think erosion is a big issue, and how we push back against that. So I've seen over time the barrier islands in particular are the way a barrier island operates is to slightly move and shift over time. A barrier island is what the title says it is. It's a barrier between the ocean and the mainland to protect the mainland mostly from storms, from any kind of system like that might negatively impact the mainland. So a barrier island grows up that way, and its purpose is to move and shift. And over time, I think in the past probably 50 or 60 years, we've seen a lot of people moving on to barrier islands, building on barrier islands, and they might not be aware of, or they might not care about the fact that those barrier islands are going to keep shifting and changing. Mother Nature in particular, the ocean is always going to win. That's the way the ocean operates. And those islands are always going to erode at some point and during some cycle of years. So on Isle of Palms in particular, just to talk about a local example, the north end of the beach on a cyclical basis erodes pretty much all the way up to the buildings that are built there, some of the condominiums that are in Wild Dunes. And in particular, they had to eventually allow the 18th hole of the golf course that was right there to be returned to nature because it was so eroded over time by the ocean. But now if you walk out there, you can see the dune system is starting to redevelop. My one concern that I've seen happen over and over again is how to deal with that erosion on our beaches. Of course, any erosion like that to that extreme where it's cutting into the developed part of the island leaves no place for sea turtles to nest. So it's very important that we consider making sure that we give that barrier island room to move and erode and accrete the way it was meant to when we're planning any new development on those islands. So something I think that is a current concern and that people see, of course, every time we have a supermoon or every time we have a hurricane system come through is that erosion on the beach and how we come back to it. I did see your recent talk with the mayor of Isle of Palms, with Mayor Pounds, and he was talking a little bit about how they take into consideration the turtle team's recommendation when they're replenishing the beach, especially after the latest hurricane came through. So I appreciate that the mayor is already making those considerations and has the sea turtles in mind. That's a huge step forward.
Yeah, and obviously they received some erosion thereafter that particular storm, as you know, unfortunately. But when it comes to the Isle of Palms, and I know I really want to talk about the book while I have some minutes with you, but where exactly do you fear that new development will impact those sea turtles?
Well, I wish I could say there was a lot of space left to develop on Isle of Palms. I think right now the whole beachfront is already developed. So new development, I don't really see happening. I think we'd have to just basically start over. If there were to be a hurricane that wiped a lot of that clean, then we'd have to be very careful about how we rebuild. But right now, I feel like the development's already there. I've seen a lot of change happen, particularly developing all the way out on the north end, building all of those buildings and houses that wrap all the way around to the marsh. That's happened probably in the past 20 years since I've been going down there. Some of which I think has been well done and set back enough. And then there are occasionally a house or two that pop out and you wonder how they managed to get around the rules, because I've seen some houses that were built right on the beach. It looked like they were basically on the dunes. I don't know if they're still there, but there were a few of them out there that I noticed about 10 years ago when I was there. So as far as Isle of Palms goes, there isn't any new space on that beachfront to develop. It's all been built out.
And I want you to put your lawyer hat on for just 30 seconds, Christian, because what ideal environmental laws would actually and would be beneficial to sea turtles in the future?
Well, I'm not an environmental lawyer. That's not what I do. But I just from having gone to law school, I can talk a little bit about that, and having been on the sea turtle team.
Sure.
If we had our dream laws put in place, then yes, we would want the sea turtles to be a piece of that environmental impact statement. Anytime someone had to build close to a beach where the turtles nest. Right now, they are state and federally protected. So as far as the turtles themselves, there are 7 species of sea turtles. We mostly see loggerhead sea turtles on our beach. That's actually our state reptile. The South Carolina state reptile is the loggerhead sea turtle. It's our most common sea turtle. And they're already protected at the state and federal level. So there is no tampering with the nests. You're not allowed to handle the sea turtles or their eggs or disturb a nesting female sea turtle. All of that is already against the law. But changes in laws that I'd like to see, is particularly in South Carolina, and there have been some in the past that have environmental laws that have helped various species. But for the sea turtles, I would like to see their nesting habitat protected, as well as the species itself. So maybe protecting that nesting habitat, which can be easily identified based on all of our data and records from the sea turtle teams, where those nests are located, pretty much every beach in the state, especially from our islands on down to the south. The farther south you go on the Atlantic coast, the more sea turtles you see. But if those sea turtle nesting habitats could be taken into consideration under law as part of an environmental impact statement, anytime development is considered on the beachfront, that would be a huge step forward.
What else should be considered in your mind?
For just development in general?
Oh, and actually protecting those sea turtles.
For any kind of laws?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we already have some in place. One of the big things that changed and was pioneered by Sally Murphy, who started a lot of the sea turtle teams here in the state, is the whole change that happened with the shrimping industry when they were catching sea turtles in their nets as bycatch. And a federal law went into effect that required shrimp boats to put in a turtle excluder device, which is a special net. We call them TEDs for short, that has an escape hatch for sea turtles. So seeing that kind of change happen already in our state, impacting a large industry in our state, is giving people a lot of hope that laws like that can be put in place that make great change to help the species. Future laws that in particular, like I said, having the sea turtles included in an environmental impact statement, also just being aware of setback laws. Like I said, making sure that the setback is far enough off the beach to allow for erosion, the natural erosion on those barrier islands, without totally destroying any dune system. And also, if there is any pre-existing dune system or a maritime forest, making sure that that's left in place so that the nesting turtles are given as much room and distance from the first row of houses and development as possible.
And where do you see natural erosion on most of these barrier islands?
Mostly on the ends. So on each end of the island, you'll notice a cycle of erosion. And particularly, my island that I always go to is Isle of Palms. That's where I'm on the sea turtle team, and I've been there for about 10 years. So I know that island the best, and have definitely seen the erosion on the north end, sometimes closer to Breach Inlet as well, like we saw with the latest storm. It's just part of the barrier island cycle. And I think one of the best things that we've done, and probably led by some of our people in position to do so, is to replenish the beach versus building up seawalls or putting a lot of rocks on the beach. For a while, we had sandbags that we were using on the beach, and none of that really prevents the erosion, and in some cases it can make it worse. So I've noticed erosion most on that barrier island. I'm sure it happens similarly all the way down the coast. I'm just not as familiar with other beaches, but I think replenishing the sand is the best way to coexist with the erosion on those islands.
And going back to the book, which is at Loggerheads, and it's a fiction book about a murder on the South Carolina barrier island, which brings together a sea turtle biologist and a local detective to unravel a mystery that might impact the race for the White House. Brooke Edens is a scientist who studied loggerhead sea turtles, has long since for a sense of home and belonging ever since her return to the Anders Isle. In late May, loggerhead sea turtles should be nesting on Anders Isle, and scientist Brooke Edens should feel more at home on the island where she grew up. So let me ask you, what was Brooke's introduction to loggerhead sea turtles?
Well, Brooke grew up on the island, and as you learn in the first chapter, has always loved marine biology and the sea creatures she would see on the island as a little girl. She grew up loving the ocean, wanting to protect nature, trying to learn about it through seeing it, and then eventually went and studied it in college and beyond. So her love for nature and sea turtles in particular really stemmed from a childhood being immersed in it and living on that island and feeling that sense of home and finding her sense of comfort and a sense of home in nature and on the beach in particular.
And what was that sense of quality life for her?
The life on the beach?
Yeah, quality life for Brooke on the beach, yes, ma'am.
Oh, well, I think she comes from pretty humble backgrounds. Her dad was an engineer. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom. You don't learn as much about her family life in the book, but she grew up just given a lot of freedom to explore nature. And her best friend is Drew Young, and he ends up in the book, you meet him as the homicide detective on the island. But they spent a lot of time riding their bikes into the maritime forest and digging in the dunes for fossilized shells and shark's teeth. A lot of, you can find those things around here still because they've been there forever. And spending a lot of time on the beach. And she eventually, organically, through doing that, saw her first sea turtle nesting and was drawn to it and felt this immediate connection. And that's why she ends up pursuing that later in her career.
As a matter of fact, you said in the book, but something is amiss. When a dead body surfaces along with other big crimes, Brooke finds herself entangled in a homicide investigation with Detective Drew Young, her closest friend and sometimes love interest. What big crime, Kristen, does Drew think is connected with this dead body?
Well, I don't want to give away
Sure.
But there are, obviously the murder is the big crime, right? That's the biggest. And then that starts to, it's not on its face just about the murder. There's a lot more happening on the island. So you have this small town, small island feel, the politics that happen in a small island town. You get to know that island town very well, and also the small town across the connector from it. So my location is fictional. It's a fictional barrier island called Anders Isle, but it's loosely based on sort of how Isle of Palms connects to Mount Pleasant. But it's farther south. In my fictional story, it's probably an hour south of Charleston. So it's between here and Beaufort. They have their own aquarium, of course, all fictionalized, and their own small town. So that's the setting.
And I know at the same time, a favorite candidate is emerging for the upcoming U.S. presidential election. And he happens to be the father of Brooke's ex-fiance, who just complicates matters with each visit to the island. So how many times does this person actually visit the island?
Well, he keeps coming for his campaign. And so obviously, so he's running for Brooke's ex-fiance shows up in the book. And he's a lawyer living in Charlotte, North Carolina. And his dad, his name's Caldwell. And Caldwell's father is a senator from North Carolina, a U.S. senator, and he's running for president. So his presidential campaign is happening when the book opens. The book happens in the span of a week in late May. in the year before a presidential election year. So very much like the year that we're in now. And also at the beginning of sea turtle nesting season. So sea turtles nest from May through August. And this book happens at the end of May, right when the sea turtles are starting to nest and during this campaign season. So the senator comes to the island, has been to the island several times, but he's coming to the island for a campaign visit. He and his family have a beach home on the neighboring barrier island called Taylor Island. So he often comes down to visit that beach home as well.
So how is he actually accepted on the island being a senator and a presidential candidate?
Well, the island welcomes him with open arms. They're very excited when he comes down for his campaign visit because it brings a lot of attention to their island. In particular, the mayor of the island sets it all up, and the small shop owners host the rally in their parking lot. So that's happening toward the end of the book, but you hear about it through our news reporter who kind of tells you what's happening as the story goes along in a couple different scenes.
Very ironic. And since I'm a journalist myself.
Yes, that always plays a role.
Exactly right. And I hate to go political, Christian, but how is the island actually filled with Democrat or Republican or independent voters?
I'd say I left that up to the reader's imagination to decide on a party line or a party affiliation. So my senator began as a Southern Democrat back when he was first getting into politics. And then he changed his tune and switched sides of the aisle and went to the Republican side. So he's running as a Republican candidate. But the way I describe him is he's trying to sort of straddle the line between the two parties and run as a more moderate Republican, sort of a more centered in pretty much all aspects of his campaign. We don't get a lot of his platform, but he is trying to run as a more pro-environment politician, while also being in the Republican Party. So his social issues side is probably more liberal, while his financial, fiscal side is more conservative.
And how is his politics accepted on that island?
Well, I think you see our store owners who host his rally are, both of them have a very positive view of him as a candidate. Most people, I think, on that island in particular, because there are nesting sea turtles and it's a very environmentally aware community for the most part. Our main character, Brooke Edens, is a sea turtle biologist. You see her working closely with her with the sea turtle lady, the turtle lady who's in charge of the turtle team, Diane Radine. So their sea turtle work is very well known. It's a small island. So in general, they're very accepting of a candidate who's taking into consideration the environment, because they would like to protect the island that they have and its natural resources.
And in 30 seconds, Christian, because Zoom is only giving you like less than a minute.
Oh, okay.
No worries. How many more webs of crimes are there to actually untangle in this story?
Well, later on, there are some things that come out about what's really going on. Like I said at the beginning, there's a great conflict between the appearance of things and what's actually happening, the truth of what's happening. So I'd say, at least 3 or 4 more different crimes of varying levels are happening at once.
And quickly, in 20 seconds, what is Drew's knowledge of sea turtles?
Oh, he learns everything from Brooke. Brooke knows everything about sea turtles, and she tells Drew. So she really helps him with the investigation by bringing in clues that are tied to the sea turtles, and he needs her help.
Wow. And how can we actually purchase your book right now?
Well, here it is. This is my book. It's out in hardcover and paperback. You can get it at the local bookstores, Buxton Books, the Village Bookseller, and Barnes & Noble in Town Center. Please pick up a copy, and I hope you enjoy it.
Author Kristen Ness, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.